Hey there, friend. Before we dive into this story, if you're new here, hit that subscribe button and leave a like. Trust me, you'll want to stay for what's coming. This is one of those stories that reminds us how quickly judgment can cloud our vision and how appearances can deceive even the most vigilant among us. Picture this: Sunset Hills, one of those upscale gated communities where every blade of grass seems measured to perfection, where the palm trees stand like silent sentinels along pristine sidewalks, and where the scent of jasmine mingles with the faint chlorine smell from crystal-clear pools. It's the kind of place where luxury sedans glide silently through smooth asphalt, where children's laughter echoes from private tennis courts, and where security is tighter than a drum. The late afternoon sun painted everything in shades of gold and amber, casting long shadows that stretched across the perfectly manicured lawns like dark fingers reaching toward the evening. The main gates stood imposing, all chrome and reinforced steel, with cameras perched like electronic hawks watching every movement. Inside the guardhouse, air conditioning hummed steadily, keeping the space cool while monitors flickered with feeds from dozens of security cameras. The lobby of Building C radiated that particular kind of quiet wealth: marble floors so polished you could see your reflection, walls adorned with abstract art that probably cost more than most people's cars, and the subtle scent of expensive air fresheners that whispered rather than shouted. Everything here had its place, everything followed an unspoken code, and everyone knew exactly where they belonged. Or at least, that's what people believed. Marcus Williams had been driving for rideshare apps for 3 years now. At 42, he'd learned to read people quickly. It was survival in his line of work. His navy blue Honda Civic wasn't new, but it was impeccably clean, the interior smelling faintly of the vanilla air freshener he changed religiously every week. He'd picked up his passenger, a young professional woman named Sarah, from the airport 20 minutes ago. She sat in the back, scrolling through her phone, occasionally giving him turn-by-turn confirmations in a friendly voice. The ride had been pleasant, unremarkable, exactly the kind Marcus preferred. As he pulled up to the imposing gates of Sunset Hills, he felt that familiar flutter of discomfort he always experienced at these high-end communities. He rolled down his window, ready to explain his purpose to the guard, when a man in a crisp security uniform approached with an expression that made Marcus's stomach tighten. The guard's name tag read Patterson, and his eyes swept over Marcus's car with unconcealed disdain, lingering on the rideshare sticker in the windshield before settling on Marcus himself with a look that spoke volumes. "Where do you think you're going?" Patterson's voice carried that particular edge of authority mixed with something darker, something Marcus had encountered too many times in his life to mistake for anything but prejudice. "Good evening, sir. I have a passenger for Unit 3C, Marcus replied calmly, gesturing toward Sarah in the back seat. His voice was steady, professional, the voice of a man who'd learned long ago that politeness was armor. Patterson barely glanced at Sarah. Instead, he stepped closer to the car, his hand resting on the door frame in a gesture that felt deliberately invasive. "We don't allow your kind of vehicles in here. Drop her at the gate. She can walk." The words hung in the air like smoke. Sarah looked up from her phone, her expression shifting from confusion to indignation. "Excuse me? I live here. He's my driver. He needs to take me to my building." But Patterson had already made up his mind, his jaw set in that stubborn line of someone who decided that rules, his interpretation of them, mattered more than reason. "Ma'am, you can walk. It's not far. We have standards here about what vehicles enter the property. Commercial vehicles use the service entrance, and even then, they need pre-authorization." His eyes never left Marcus as he spoke, and Marcus felt the familiar burn of humiliation creeping up his neck. Marcus felt the weight of the moment pressing down on his shoulders like a physical force. He could see other residents passing by, a woman in designer workout clothes power walking with her tiny dog, an elderly couple strolling hand in hand, a teenager on a skateboard weaving between the perfectly spaced lampposts. Each one glanced toward the commotion at the gate, their eyes taking in the scene with that particular brand of curiosity that never quite transforms into action. They saw, they registered, and they kept moving, their footsteps carrying them away from the uncomfortable reality unfolding before them. Sarah had stepped out of the car now, her voice rising with indignation. "This is absolutely ridiculous. I'm calling the property manager. This man is providing a legitimate service. There's no rule against rideshare drivers entering." But Patterson remained unmoved, his stance widening as if planting himself more firmly in his position of power. Another guard had joined him now, a younger man who seemed uncertain but unwilling to contradict his superior. Marcus sat behind the wheel, his hands gripping it tightly, knuckles pale against his dark skin. He wanted to argue, wanted to defend himself, but decades of experience had taught him that sometimes resistance only made things worse. Inside his chest, his heart hammered with a mixture of anger and shame, anger at the injustice, shame that it was happening again, shame that Sarah had to witness it, shame that he felt powerless to change it. The rational part of his brain told him to stay calm, to let Sarah handle it, to not give Patterson any excuse to escalate. But another part, the part that remembered every slight, every assumption, every moment someone had looked at him and seen a threat instead of a human being, that part screamed silently. He could hear Patterson's voice growing louder, more aggressive. "Ma'am, if you continue to cause a disturbance, I'll have to file a report with the HOA board. This vehicle needs to leave now, or I'm calling the police for trespassing." The threat hung in the air like a storm cloud, and Marcus felt his throat tighten. Police. The word carried weight, carried danger, carried possibilities he didn't want to contemplate. His mind flashed to news stories, to statistics, to the ever-present awareness that a simple misunderstanding could spiral into something tragic. Now, let me pause the story for just a moment and talk directly to you, because this is important. How many times have you witnessed something like this? Maybe not exactly this situation, but something close, someone being judged, dismissed, or humiliated based on nothing more than appearance, assumption, or prejudice. It happens every single day, in communities just like this one, in workplaces, in stores, on streets corner after street corner. And the worst part? Most of us see it happening and we walk right past, just like those residents did. We tell ourselves it's not our business, that someone else will step in, that maybe we don't have the whole story. But here's the truth that makes this story so powerful: injustice thrives in silence. It grows in those moments when good people choose comfort over courage, when we decide that getting involved is too messy, too complicated, too risky. Marcus wasn't doing anything wrong. He was a hardworking man trying to earn an honest living, trying to provide excellent service to his customer, trying to do everything by the book. And yet there he sat, being treated like a criminal, being threatened with police involvement, all because someone in a position of minor authority decided that he didn't belong. Think about that for a second. Really think about it. What would you do if you were one of those residents walking by? Would you stop? Would you speak up? Would you use whatever privilege or position you had to say this isn't right? Or would you keep walking, telling yourself it wasn't your problem? I'm asking you this because what happens next in this story matters. But what matters even more is what you would do in real life, when you're faced with a moment like this. Because every single one of us will face that moment eventually. The question is, what kind of person will you choose to be? The air changed before anything else did. It was subtle at first, the way the atmosphere shifts right before a thunderstorm breaks, a pregnant pause where even the birds seem to hold their breath. The golden afternoon light had begun its transition into the deeper amber of early evening, and shadows stretched longer across the pavement like dark rivers flowing between the buildings. Marcus noticed it first in the sudden silence. Patterson had stopped mid-sentence, his fingers still pointing accusingly, but his words dying in his throat as his gaze shifted to something beyond Marcus's car. The sound of footsteps echoed through the quiet, not hurried, but deliberate, each footfall carrying weight and purpose. They rang out against the marble pathway with a steady rhythm that seemed to command attention without demanding it. Marcus glanced in his rearview mirror and saw residents who had been walking away now stopping, turning, their expressions shifting from studied indifference to something else entirely. Recognition, perhaps. Or was it relief? The skateboarding teenager had frozen mid-push, one foot hovering above the ground. The woman with the designer dog had stopped so abruptly that her pet's leash went taut. A car door closed somewhere in the distance, a solid, expensive sound that spoke of German engineering and meticulous maintenance. The security monitors inside the guardhouse flickered, and through Marcus's side mirror, he could see the younger guard's posture change completely, his shoulders squaring, his uncertain expression transforming into something approaching panic. Patterson's confidence, so unshakable moments before, seemed to waver like a candle flame in a sudden breeze. His hand dropped from Marcus's car door, and he took an almost imperceptible step backward. The jasmine scent in the air seemed suddenly stronger, mixing with something else, expensive cologne, the kind that didn't announce itself but simply existed as an undertone of refinement. Marcus felt the energy around him shifting, felt the molecules in the air rearranging themselves around an approaching presence. He didn't know who was coming, but he knew with absolute certainty that everything was about to change. He appeared like a figure stepping out of a different world entirely, though he'd simply walked from the parking area reserved for Building C's penthouse residents. Richard Chin moved with the unhurried grace of someone who had never needed to prove anything to anyone, his presence commanding attention without demanding it. He was in his late 50s, his silver-streaked hair impeccably styled, wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Marcus earned in a month, yet somehow he wore it as casually as others might wear jeans. His wire-rimmed glasses caught the fading sunlight, and his eyes, sharp, intelligent, missing nothing, took in the entire scene with a single sweeping glance. Behind him walked a woman who could only be his wife, elegant in a flowing cream dress, her expression one of growing concern as she absorbed what was happening at her community's gate. Richard's expensive Italian leather shoes made almost no sound now as he closed the distance, but his approach carried the weight of inevitability, like watching a chess grandmaster move toward checkmate. Patterson's face had gone through a remarkable transformation, cycling from confusion to recognition to something approaching terror in the span of 3 seconds. "Mr. Chen," Patterson stammered, his authoritative voice from moments ago now reduced to something small and uncertain. There was a situation with unauthorized." Richard raised one hand, a simple gesture, but it cut through Patterson's words as effectively as a knife through silk. He didn't speak immediately. Instead, he walked directly to Marcus's car, his movements deliberate and filled with purpose. He stopped at the driver's window, and for the first time, Marcus found himself looking into eyes that saw him, truly saw him, not as a category, not as a threat, not as someone who didn't belong, but as a human being deserving of basic dignity and respect. "Mr. Williams," Richard said, and his voice carried the warmth of genuine courtesy, "I apologize for this unconscionable delay. You're providing a service to Ms. Rodriguez, who lives in my building. There is absolutely no reason for you to be detained at this gate." He turned then, and the temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees as his gaze settled on Patterson. The older security guard looked as though he wanted the marble beneath his feet to open up and swallow him whole. The silence that followed was the kind that makes people acutely aware of their own breathing. Richard Chin didn't raise his voice, he didn't need to. His words came measured and precise, each one landing with the weight of consequence. "Patterson, in the 3 years you've worked here, have you ever stopped a luxury sedan at this gate and demanded the driver drop their passenger and leave? Have you ever told someone in a Mercedes or a BMW that they needed to use the service entrance?" Patterson opened his mouth, then closed it again. The younger guard beside him had taken another step back, clearly wanting to distance himself from whatever was about to unfold. Residents who had been mere spectators moments ago now stood frozen, witnesses to something they sensed would be talked about for months to come. "Mr. Chen, we have protocols about commercial vehicles." "Commercial vehicles?" Richard's eyebrow arched slightly. "Mr. Williams is providing transportation services, just as the luxury car service I use provides transportation services. The only difference I can see is the company logo on his windshield," and he paused, letting the weight of the unsaid hang in the air. "Well, I think we all know what the real difference is, don't we?" Patterson's face had gone from red to pale, a sheen of sweat visible on his forehead despite the cooling evening air. Sarah stood beside Marcus's car, her arms crossed, her expression a mixture of vindication and anger. Richard's wife had approached as well, and she placed a gentle hand on Marcus's car door, her eyes kind and apologetic. "Mr. Williams," Richard continued, his attention returning to Marcus, "please, drive Ms. Rodriguez to her residence. Take the main boulevard, the one with the fountains. It's the most scenic route, and after this inexcusable treatment, you both deserve to see something beautiful." He pulled out his phone with a swift, practiced motion. "I'm texting the property management company right now. You'll have a permanent authorization in the system within the hour. If you ever, and I mean ever, face this kind of treatment here again, you call me directly." He produced a business card from his jacket pocket, extending it to Marcus through the window. Marcus took the card with trembling fingers, his throat tight with emotion. "Sir, thank you. I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything," Richard replied, his voice softening. You were doing your job with professionalism and dignity. You deserve to be treated with the same. He turned back to Patterson, and his voice took on an edge of steel. As for you, Patterson, consider yourself on immediate suspension pending a full investigation. The HOA board will be hearing about this, as will your employer. We'll discuss whether Sunset Hills wants to continue contracting with a security company that trains its personnel to profile and harass service workers. Richard Chin didn't move away from Marcus's car immediately. Instead, he leaned down slightly, his expression thoughtful, as if weighing something important in his mind. The evening breeze had picked up, rustling through the palm trees and carrying with it the distant sound of children playing in one of the community pools. The moment felt suspended, caught between what had just happened and what would come next. Mr. Williams, Richard said quietly, his voice meant only for Marcus and those closest to the car, I know words can't undo what just happened here. I know an apology from me doesn't erase the humiliation you felt, the anger, the fear. But I want you to understand something. He reached into his other pocket and pulled out a small leather wallet, extracting from it a faded photograph protected by laminated plastic. He held it up so Marcus could see, a young Asian man in work clothes standing beside an old pickup truck, his face weathered but smiling. That's my father, Richard continued, his voice carrying a weight of memory. He came to this country with nothing. He worked as a gardener, a handyman, whatever would pay. And people looked at him the way Patterson looked at you today, like he was less than, like he didn't belong in the neighborhoods where he worked, like his labor was necessary but his presence was somehow offensive. Richard's eyes met Marcus's, and there was understanding there, recognition of a shared pain across different times and experiences. He taught me that dignity isn't given by others, it's something you carry inside. But he also taught me that those of us who make it through, who succeed, who gain a voice, we have an obligation to use it. He placed the business card more firmly in Marcus's hand, covering it with both of his own for a moment. This isn't just for emergencies here at Sunset Hills. If you ever need a reference, if you're looking to transition to something else, if you need someone to make a call, you use that number. My father didn't have anyone to stand up for him. But you do now. Marcus felt tears threatening at the corners of his eyes and blinked them back. Mr. Chen, I don't know how to thank you for this. You thank me by never letting anyone make you feel like you don't matter, Richard replied. And someday, when you're in a position to speak up for someone else, you do it. That's how we change things, one moment of courage at a time. Sarah had climbed back into the car, wiping at her own eyes. Patterson and the younger guard were already walking toward the guardhouse, Patterson's shoulders hunched in defeat, his radio crackling with what was undoubtedly his supervisor demanding to know what was happening. Other residents had begun to disperse, but Marcus noticed several of them glancing back, their expressions thoughtful, perhaps questioning their own earlier inaction. Richard's wife squeezed her husband's shoulder gently, pride evident in her smile. As Marcus prepared to drive forward, Richard stepped back and gave him a small nod, not of superiority to subordinate, but of one human being acknowledging another's worth. The gate, which had seemed like an impenetrable barrier minutes ago, now swung open smoothly, welcoming rather than forbidding. Marcus drove through those gates with his head held higher than when he'd arrived, the weight that had pressed on his shoulders lifted by something more powerful than anger or vindication. It was the simple, profound gift of being seen, of being valued, of being reminded that his dignity was not subject to someone else's prejudice. Sarah thanked him profusely when he dropped her at Building C, tipping generously and promising to request him specifically for all future rides. As he drove back out through those same gates, Patterson nowhere to be seen, Marcus glanced at the business card on his dashboard and felt something shift inside him, a restoration of faith, perhaps, or simply the knowledge that not all battles have to be fought alone. The story of what happened that evening at Sunset Hills spread through the community like wildfire. Some residents felt ashamed of their inaction, others began questioning their own assumptions and biases. The security company, facing potential loss of a lucrative contract, implemented mandatory anti-discrimination training. Patterson was quietly let go. But the real change was subtler, deeper. It was in the way people began to notice the invisible workers who moved through their privileged spaces, the way they started to see rather than overlook, to acknowledge rather than ignore. Richard Chen's gesture wasn't just about defending Marcus, it was about using privilege as a bridge rather than a wall, about understanding that true leadership means standing up when it's uncomfortable, speaking out when silence would be easier, and recognizing that our shared humanity matters more than any gate, any uniform, any arbitrary line we draw between us and them. Here's what I want you to take away from this: courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's the quiet decision to stop walking, to turn around, to say this isn't right when everyone else is choosing comfortable silence. It's the willingness to see people, really see them, beyond the labels and assumptions we carry. Marcus was just trying to do his job. Richard was just being decent. But in that intersection of injustice and intervention, something profound happened. So let me ask you this, and I really want you to think about it, maybe even share your thoughts in the comments below. When was the last time you stood up for someone who couldn't stand up for themselves? When was the last time you used whatever privilege, power, or voice you have to make things right? And more importantly, what will you do the next time you witness injustice, the next time someone needs an ally, the next time the easy thing is to keep walking but the right thing is to stop? If this story touched your heart, if it made you think about the Marcus Williamses in your own community or the moments when you could be a Richard Chen, leave a like, drop a comment sharing your thoughts, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Because change doesn't happen in grand gestures alone, it happens in 1,000 small moments when ordinary people choose to be extraordinary, when we decide that everyone deserves dignity, respect, and the simple recognition that they belong. Sometimes courage wears a business suit and carries a faded photograph. Sometimes it's just about remembering that every person has a story, every worker has worth, and every moment is a chance to be better than we were yesterday.